Hello everyone, welcome to my art channel where we do painting tutorials. Like always, I start by taping down the paper so it stays flat as I paint. Then I take a scrap piece of watercolor paper and I'm going to scribble on top of it the colors I'm going to use for this painting. So I use some earthy green, cadmium orange, yellow and blue, reddish, which is a very dark blue, my darkest blue from this set, and also a tiny amount of walnut brown. If you don't have scrap pieces of watercolor paper to spare, you can definitely use the back side of the next page, but I didn't for this painting because it is out of frame and you would not be able to see what I'm exactly doing. Or you can also leave about an inch below your painting and use that area instead of taping it down. Then I take my cup with water and I apply 3 to 4 droplets on top of each of the colors I have on that piece of paper. I want this to be a very light diluted mix, so that's why I add a lot of water to it, and the reason I'm using specifically watercolor paper is so it can hold the water and function as a tiny palette. If I were to use printer's paper, it would just warp altogether and maybe break, and it's not ideal. So I mix all of those colors and I test it on a napkin to see what is the final tone I have. I'm aiming for a very diluted coffee color and I randomly color the background with it. Just in the center between the trees I have in my pencil sketch, I will do some very loose tree shapes. Just in the center because that is the only area that is going to be visible after I paint the big trees in the foreground. I'm just randomly doodling around, randomly painting the sides, and I leave the top blank because I'm going to paint the sky layer on over there. I add a bit more blue and green to the mix and then I go over those very diffused trees, those faraway trees in the center, just to give a bit more definition to them. And I'm doing some random vertical lines for tree trunks. Once it has dried, I take some ultramarine blue, I dilute with a good amount of water and I add a tiny droplet of that mix we used for the foreground. With this, I'm going to paint that blank space I left for the sky. I try to get in between the trees and fill any white spaces I see, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It's fine if there are still some random patches that are not perfectly colored. It's a painting, it's not a picture, it doesn't matter. At least for my style, I like it to be more on the illustrative side. Since the balm has already dried, I start by coloring the foliage with a base layer of my earthy green, so I color all of the branches and all of the leaves with it. I'm applying it rather randomly, not trying to cover it 100% because I'm going to layer other colors on top. I erase parts of the sketch as I go because I wasn't really too careful when I sketched it the previous night. So I get rid of any pencil marks that are going to be on elements that are in the foreground and are covering those in the background. I hope that made sense. Then I take my dark blue and I underline all of the branches and the foliage, and I go with a bit of orange on top of the blue to neutralize it and make it more of a shadow color. Then with barely any water on my brush, I start tapping from light to dark, so from the top of each branch where it's mostly just green towards the bottom towards my blue and orange mix. I'm using barely any water because I want this to be very saturated. I want the colors to be stronger. And then I take some walnut brown and I just cover the tree trunk with it. I also add tiny hints of orange, and for the bottom I use black. That way we have the sunlight that is hitting mostly the top of the tree, and the bottom is covered by grass and bushes, and the other trees are casting their shadows and so on. I repeat these same exact steps for all of the remaining trees and bushes, so I do a base layer of earthy green, I underline it with blue and orange, and here and there I add tiny bits of yellow or dark yellow or bright orange on the top of the branches for an added highlight. If drawing is not your thing, there is a traceable available to this and many other paintings over at my Patreon page, Sunshine Arts. We also do full-time tutorials there, and I upload high-resolution downloads, basically digital prints of my artwork, so if you want to check that out, link will be available in the description box, or you can click the card at the end of the video. Like always, all of the supplies and the reference picture, well, more like the inspiration picture, will be linked down in the description box as well. Back to us, I just keep outlining my foliage with blue. I also color the grass with that same exact technique on the bottom. And I switched to an eraser pencil, which is the blue pencil with the brush tip you see me using. It's basically an eraser within the body of a pencil and just gives me a bit better control over a regular eraser. I can erase tiny details without ruining my painting. I usually use a kneaded eraser for this purpose, but I couldn't find mine for this painting. I don't know where I placed it, sorry, but that's why I used this tool instead. And just like for the first tree, I take my watercolor brush with barely any water on it. I tread mostly on the napkin you see on the bottom, and I use a tapping motion to activate the colors on the foliage, going from light to dark, so from the green towards the blue. It's okay if you can still see some of the pencil markings once it has dried, that is perfectly fine. I'm not aiming for 100% smooth details here. I don't really like those, so if there's one bit that's smooth or one bit that's lighter and then the other one is darker, that's perfectly fine by me. That's actually an effect I really like and enjoy. Once the foliage is pretty much dry, I take walnut brown and I color about half of each tree with it. I'm mostly focusing it on the right side of the left tree and the left side of the right tree because I want the light to be peeking from the sky, so from the center. I'm very randomly coloring this very roughly. If you've ever seen a 3-year-old in a coloring book, that is the technique I'm using, 3-year-old painting in a coloring book. Then I take my dark blue and I color the remaining bits with it, so the sides of the trees, they're pointing towards the edges of my painting, towards the tape. And then, you guessed it, I'm going to take a bit of orange and go with it over the blue, but I'm also going to apply bits of my orange towards the inner side of the trees because that's where I want the light to be coming from. And for the bottom, there is closest to the bushes and the grass. I want a bit of black there, and I also use black where the leaves on the branches are covering parts of the trees and you can't really see the bark from it. I'm basically using black as an added shadow. And then I go back to my walnut brown and I just do some very tiny wiggly branches in the foliage, some tiny lines, they're just peeking through. They don't have to be connected to each other. I'm just making some dashes, some vertical lines, diagonal lines. Then again, I take my watercolor brush and I randomly start going up and down, up and down. It's okay if they mix. What I'm trying to get is that tree bark effect, so I'm just using vertical motions here. And before you come at me saying, no, you're supposed to do one big motion from up and down, you're not supposed to do, what do you call that, like chicken legs? I don't know, somebody called it like that once in the comments, but that is specifically the effect I'm going for. I sort of know how to draw a straight line. I'm doing this on purpose. It's not because I don't know how to draw a straight line. Thank you very much. And then I repeat that for the tree I have on the left side of my painting. Oh, and also I like going from the top downwards because on the top I add more orange and the bottom I add more black. So again, I'm respecting that row that I paint in order from light to dark. I color any blank spaces in the foliage with earthy green. Any white spaces because it doesn't really make sense in my brain to have white over a tree. And the composition was still looking a bit off, like right there in the middle. It looked like it was missing something, so I just take a normal graphite pencil. In case I mess it up, I can easily erase a graphite pencil, but you cannot easily erase a colored pencil. And I sketch out a tree, see if I like it. I did like it, so I take my earthy green, I color the foliage, the branches, I underline them with dark blue, then I go over the blue with some orange, and lastly, I activate it from light to dark very lightly, just tapping over it, and then I do the tree trunk with some black. I'm trying to make a very fine top and a thicker bottom for this tiny improvised pine tree, and there we have a little improvised tree. Then I just sign and I slowly peel off the tape in the opposite direction to avoid ripping my paper. I'd like to give a very special thank you to my Patreon supporters for the month of May, and thank you all for watching. We'll see each other in the next video. Bye bye!